Hello, my name is Charlie Deist, and I am going to be leading a 40-day introduction to spiritual fasting, which I'm calling the Benedict Challenge, named for the founder of Western Monasticism. You may have heard of him. His name is Saint Benedict of Nursia. Writing in the 500s, he was experiencing the collapse of the Roman Empire in real time and felt compelled to provide a communal setting for Christians to avoid the chaos of this collapse. It was a grievous moment, and as the Bible uh, recounts, in many instances, fasting is one of the responses that we're called to engage in when we have a grievous moment like this upon us. And I think today, my motivation for doing this challenge is that we face a crisis. In fact, we face multiple crises. There's the COVID-19 pandemic and the earlier epidemic of metabolic syndrome, which has played into a lot of the death and destruction from COVID-19. This, as we'll see, has a direct link to intermittent fasting. But also there's a broader crisis in our culture, which has become hostile to people of faith. And this is meant to challenge Christians, Catholics, or anyone who feels challenged by the current hostile culture to look first within and see what you can do in your own life to kind of clean up your house, clean up your room. We learn in the Bible that prayer and fasting are two of the most powerful tools for casting out demons. But along with this, Catholics are rediscovering the bodily element of faith and fasting. And so you might have heard of intermittent fasting as a trendy life hack, but in fact, this goes back much farther than the modern day. We can reclaim spiritual fasting for modern times. And in particular, there's one kind of fasting that's been referred to as OMAD, or one meal a day. It finds its roots in the writings of Saint Benedict of Nursia. He says in the 4th chapter of his rule, "Renounce yourself in order to follow Christ. Discipline your body. Do not pamper yourself, but love fasting." And this last clause was taken as the title of a book by a Benedictine monk who lived in modern times, Adalbert de Vogüé. Now, de Vogüé was a French Benedictine who noticed that his own community, the Benedictines in France, had pretty much abandoned fasting. Not only was it hard to do in a community, it was actually actively discouraged. So whatever difficulty there was to begin with was compounded by the almost prohibition, making it impossible to love fasting, as his book was called. People said that man had changed. The weakness of people's health no longer allows us to fast. Was it true? And he discovers through his own experience of eating one meal a day at 6:30 for years on end that no, this was not true. And after a short adjustment period, he experienced the joy of fasting that Saint Benedict had referred to. He also experienced that it gave him a mental clarity. My mind is at its most lucid, my body vigorous and well disposed, my heart light and full of joy. We can contrast this with the account we hear of fasting in the in the New Testament, where the Pharisees contort their faces. Instead, we are to experience the fast as an inward turning, not touting it before people, but hoping that we get to this place of true joy. The Benedict Challenge is partly inspired by a book called The Benedict Option, where the author Rod Dreher leans on the writings of a philosopher named Alasdair MacIntyre, who saw the modern world as going through a kind of a crisis like the collapse of the Roman Empire, with the barbarians at the gate surrounding these communities on all sides. And there was a need in St. Benedict's time, as there is today, to look for ways to foster community where a moral life can flourish amid the coming dark ages. And even if you don't believe me that we're coming for dark ages, you can still appreciate the bodily aspect of fasting. But I think that this orients us to have the right motivation. We don't want to be looking at this 40 days of one meal a day as a kind of a life hack, even though there might be, and there will be, numerous physical benefits. Instead, we want to take the biblical view, the view that the prophets urged people to take when times of trouble were upon the people of Israel. And here I think we have the prophet Jeremiah, who's lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem and the Babylonian captivity. It's a response to a grievous moment, and there's no shortage of those surrounding us today. But we don't want to get stuck in the dour mindset. Instead, we want to focus on this word, epiousion. Give us today our daily bread. That daily word is actually a Greek word that means supersubstantial, our supersubstantial bread. And we see in the Gospel of Matthew how Jesus is tempted by the devil in the wilderness, offered a kind of all-you-can-eat buffet of bread. And he says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." This is what we mean by epiousion. It's the faith-sustaining and life-giving word of God. 40 days was the number of days that Jesus spent in the wilderness. And it's going to be the amount of time that we take to try to reset our habits and our mindset and our bodies to be able to fast more easily. I call it crossing the Jordan, but there's basically three components to this switchover that will be taking place. The first is mindset. We tend to have a scarcity mindset around food that's ingrained in us from our evolutionary past. You kind of get it while you can, get whatever food you can. But when we see our bread coming to us from a loving and giving higher power, we can be freed from this scarcity mindset to live in a mindset of abundance and trust. Beyond this, we can also experience the joys of fasting and not contort our faces or feel a need to gain some sort of merit from society. We can basically keep quiet about it if we want. And then thirdly, we want to undergo a physiological change, the switchover that happens when we go from eating 3 times a day or snacking in between meals and always being fueled by sugar and glycogen, glucose, to running on our body's own stores of energy, which are abundant, both in the form of fat and these excess proteins and junk organelles that we accumulate. When we don't fast, those stay with us and slow us down. But when we fast, this is just one of the scientific explanations that might be behind some of the spiritual power of fasting. We auto-digest and recycle these components, freeing up space in our cells and making them function more efficiently. But fundamentally, in order to get to this switchover, we have to jump in somewhere. And de Vogüé said that the way to do this is to trust in the word of God, in the example of the saints, in the great voice of tradition, and then trusting in this witness. Try it. There will be planning and preparation for each week of fasting where you have clear goals following the latest psychology and how to achieve new habits. Then we'll talk about the science of metabolism and how we store and burn energy, what's going on in our cells with this process of self-digestion. We'll talk about spirituality and the biblical view of fasting. And then I'm also going to be offering a book of recipes for nourishing meals that you can eat during your narrow eating window each day, whether you're doing 2 meals, 1 meal. And I want you to feel free to modify the template that I'm giving you according to whatever suits your body. Listen to it and listen to the saints, listen to Saint Benedict, whose community ate 2 meals at most and 1 on many of the fasting days. I guarantee you, you won't starve from a couple days of eating 1 meal a day. I hope you'll join me on this journey. It's going to be one of intense change. I think the times that we're living through necessitate a certain kind of change and preparation to encounter God in a new way and to change our relationship to the literal daily bread, as well as the epiousian, supersubstantial bread. So you can find out more and sign up for the full course materials, all 40 days in one place at anaturalmethod.com/Benedict, or you can watch these videos daily as they come out Monday through Friday. And I hope you'll join me on this journey. I look forward to seeing you on the road.